Yeah, so Adina's going to hook up the laptop. It's going to play a recorded talk by Johannes Laurin Hörmann. However, he is going to be available for the Q&A session, so you'll be able to ask questions of him, and yeah, we'll make that work and at least find out together. So his bio is Johannes just completed his PhD at the University of Freiburg on the topic of friction of absorption films with reproducible molecular dynamics. The research group he was embedded in started using dtool as the method of choice for their internal RDM. He quickly evolved into a power user, integrating dtool datasets in his computational workflows for high throughput exploration of high-dimensional parametric spaces. His involvement with the group internal RDM lead led him to the data steward role at the Cluster of Excellence Liv Matz at the University of Freiburg, where he developed and implemented RDM policy together with other PIs. He advanced to a co-developer and maintainer of the dtool ecosystem and published together with the original dtool authors on making dtool datasets findable with dserver. He wants to leverage dtool for didactic purposes in RDM trainings and make it interoperable with other RDM ecosystems such as DataLad to embed it within the wider landscape of fair tools and services. And with that, here's his talk.
He introduced dtool and dserver at the last iteration of this conference, quite spontaneously in the unconference, and I thought it would be a very nice opportunity to present it formally now at the second iteration of distributes. So I will be talking about dtool and dserver, a flexible ecosystem for findable data with applications in solid mechanics, molecular dynamics, and multiscale simulations. I usually begin my talk with this acronym FAIR, as in fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data, and ask the question, why do we actually want data to be fair? Is it to benefit science and society as a whole? Is it to benefit other scientists, maybe other data scientists, so that they can run meta-analysis on our own data and produce their own research with it? Or is it to the personal benefit to the individual researcher? And from the perspective of a data steward, I think all of those aspects are important, but the one aspect that will convince individual researchers is the personal benefit. If I can offer an opportunity to researchers to improve their own data management and save them time, make collaborations with the future self easier or with colleagues, and then the other benefits to other scientists and benefit to science and society as a whole will come along. What's at the core of many research data management tools and platforms? It's this concept of self-descripted datasets that's at the core of Lett, and that's also at the core of dtool. It's a self-descriptive datasets. They package together raw data, data files, documentation, code, and descriptive metadata, and a self-descriptive, self-contained whole. With dtool, the structure of the data, the content of the data set in a simplified manner might look like this. On the left-hand side, you see descriptive metadata, and dtool datasets arrange descriptive metadata in 3 increasing layers of complexity. There are tags, there are annotations, these are simple key value pairs, and then there is an arbitrarily complex free-format YAML README that may contain whatever one wants to put in there. And then, of course, there is the data files on the right-hand side. Now, one important concept with dtool is the assignment of an individual UUID for each individual data set. And here that is very close, or pretty much the same as what DataLad does with its own data sets. I want to say a few words about design of dtool. So dtool, as shown in the title, helps with the air and fair. It improves the accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of data. This has not been my work. dtool has originally been written and published by Olsen and Hartley during their time at the John Innes Center in the UK, with the idea in mind that one unified Python API that interacts with the instances of distributed datasets should abstract away the storage infrastructure. Therefore, under the hood of this dtool core Python API live several Python packages as so-called storage brokers that interact with whatever storage infrastructure we have at hand. So, for example, classical file systems, Windows network shares, S3 object storage, or others. On top of that dtool core API, then are either user-written scripts that automate interaction with datasets, or manual interaction via client command line interface or graphical user interface. I want to embed dtool within Datalet and RO-Crate, because I think those are the software ecosystems that come closest to what dtool does. There's one important difference between dtool and Datalet. Datalet is inherently based on Git and Git Annex, and therefore puts a strong emphasis on versioning of data. dtool, on the other side, does not explicitly excludes any versioning of data. Instead, it just supports a binary freezing mechanism that makes data immutable once the data set is complete. As for metadata, I understand that Datalet outsources the handling of metadata to an extension called Metalet. It's a dtool that's part of the core interface, but then again, compared to RO-Crates that put a heavy focus on metadata schema, dtool at its level of the hierarchy does not impose any restrictions on the mutable metadata. The core of dtool, as you have seen, is written in Python only. And the storage layer abstraction also happens in this core Python module, while the storage layer abstraction at the Datalet level happens at the implementation level of Git Annex via the Git Annex special remotes. The scope of dtool, in its purely distributed nature without any centralized services, addresses data management at the lowest level, the lowest layer of this data maturity pyramid. This data maturity pyramid is meant to show the quality of data from, the accumulation of data on our local hard drives, or maybe on HPC infrastructure or on the cloud, or wherever data is created, maybe in the lab. And then this migration towards high quality data that eventually might be published in repository platforms. Now, what about the findability in FAIR? I've said that dtool addresses the air in FAIR. Now comes our contribution to tackle the F. We extend the dtool ecosystem by dserver. That's a server app that makes collections of dtool datasets findable, searchable, and thereby extends the scope on this data maturity pyramid towards the intermediate layers. Explicitly, it's not aimed at addressing data publication directly, because for that purpose there exist many well-established repositories that also put stricter requirements on the imposed metadata, such as author information or licensing information, for example, Zenodo. Here you see a simple web interface of the server written in Vue. You see a list of data sets, and on the right-hand side you see the information that is stored, the metadata that is stored with the data set, the tags, the annotations, the free format, README, and then a list of files included. So this is how a data set might look like. And then we can make these kind of collections of data sets searchable with the server. The implementation of the server in analogy to the implementation of dtool, has been arranged in this kind of block diagram in layers. At the core is the standardization of interaction with the server via a REST API. Below that, under the hood of the server, is a Flask app that has also been organized in a modular fashion, where there is a core SQL database for central administrative duties such as user management, but then for storing and retrieving and searching metadata, there are other plugins that are interchangeable. And in our reference implementation, we use the Mongo database with its JSON-like hierarchical documents for storing and making metadata searchable. Here you see the integration of dtool and dserver. You can again see the analogy in the implementation, the modularization of the two software projects. And of course, the separation between both makes it very convenient to maintain, and also makes the ingestion of dtool datasets very straightforward with dserver by just utilizing the dtool core API. I would like to show you a few sample use cases now. Here, this is the simplest use case, the manual use case for provenance tracking of datasets. A user who is preparing a manuscript here has embedded in his source code, in his tech code for his manuscript, the UUIDs of dtool datasets that contain the data that have led to the figures shown in the manuscript. And this makes, this is what I call the provenance tracking and research data management on a very individual level on the local file system, possibly. Now, this is a use case on the other end of the spectrum. This is my own use case, which I describe in detail in my PhD dissertation. And that's the integration of dtool in automized workflow management solution. Here, Fireworks that manages computational workflows. I've shown a simple example of workflows of an automized workflow that orchestrates simulations to sweep an experimental parameter matrix for shooting a gold cluster into a gold substrate. And this is what I have done in my master thesis on large scales for molecular for adsorption films, for research on adsorption films. dtool and Fireworks work very well together because it's quite straightforward to generate dtool datasets from Fireworks workflow steps, and the other way around to generate workflow steps out of dtool datasets, because both of them use the same kind of mechanism for representing metadata, namely JSON-like documents managed in a Mongo database. And what is very convenient for post-processing, for selective post-processing, is then taking cross-sections through the parametric space by arbitrary dimensions using this Mongo-like query language that addresses specific fields in the YAML or JSON-like metadata. Now, here you see a list of 3 major publications that have been created with the help of dtool. The first one represents the first manual use case that I have shown, where the user just used dtool for provenance tracking on an individual level. The last one represents the other end of the spectrum, my use case of integrating dtool with automized workflow management to generate huge databases, organically growing databases of simulation results. Then in the middle, there is a third contribution where the server has played an important role in growing a database of simulation results that train non-parametric regression. This is on the level of physics-informed machine learning, where results from atomistic simulations help to build a database that then trains simulations on the continuum scale. Now I'd move forward to my conclusion. You see again the modular implementation of dtool and dserver. The core layer that abstracts away the underlying modularity. We made sure that the workflow engine can talk easily to our software via standardization as a Python API in case of dtool and standardization with a REST API in the case of dserver. We made our tools very maintainable by modularization. And on this diagram, each tool here really just does one thing. By fulfilling these 3 core points, our software fits very well into this best practice concept, the 10 simple rules for making a software tool workflow ready. These are 3 of those rules. All the other rules that are mentioned by Brack et al. Here in 2022 are met very well by dtool and dserver as well. With that, I'd like to point out the 2 core publications again on dtool here on the right-hand side for the air infill and on dserver on the other side, published here in PLOS ONE in 2024 for addressing the findability. I invite everybody to have a look at the dtool landing page and play around with our demonstrator instance and with our demonstrator Docker container. There are a few sample data sets to download and the Docker container to pull. With that, everybody can, within minutes, build their own dtool dataset database locally and test it and see how that works for them. Here you find again information on the dtool landing page and also my personal website. And thereby I'd like to conclude by showing this obligatory data life cycle with the scope of dtool and dserver shown here by this arrow. Thank you very much for your attention. Now I'll use the remaining time to show you briefly how to set up a local instance of dserver and build the database on a few sample data sets and play around with those. Now what's always very nice is this recommendation by Google. Did you mean stool and server? No, I meant dtool and dserver. And I navigate to the dtool webpage www.dtool.dev. From the tutorials page, I scroll down a bit. I have a look at this dtool, the dserver demonstrator instance. There's a suggestion on populating a local dserver instance with some sample data sets. So I download those sample data sets. I open the containing folder. Here they are. I extract them directly here in this folder, downloads. There it is. Make sure that everything is there in the sample datasets folder. Grandmother, mother, sister, stepsister, a couple of datasets. Next, I copy this command for running a Docker container. I have to, of course, modify it a little bit to work on Windows. Okay, now we are here in the downloads folder. I passed my command. I modify it. The pwd command won't work on Windows, so let's change this a little bit. Let's be proper and use a backslash and see what happens. And there are 9 data sets. Here we are. There you see the brother, the ex-husband, the father, the friend, with the tags, with the content of the README, with the annotations. What I cannot do is, of course, search by, for example, certain content in the annotations. Let's say annotations, Doppelpunkt, 6, female. And I get all the female members of this extended family. You can also look for tags. Let's see, for example, tags, core family. And I get all the members of the core family, and so on and so forth.
All right, then thank you to Johannes.